On this day, 14th of April 1865, 151 years ago, President Abraham Lincoln was shot. He died the next morning from his injuries, and the United States lost one of its greatest citizens. He became president in 1860 and led the northern states during the American Civil War against the Confederacy of the southern states. They had separated themselves from the United States after Lincoln's administration proposed the banning of slavery. The 5 years of war that followed were one of the bloodiest in human history. More Americans died than during the two world wars, the Korean War, and the Vietnam War combined. But what many people don't know is that Scotland had a very important role to play in the American Civil War. But not all Scots supported the North. Quite a few supported the South, especially those who had interests in industry, especially the cotton industry, which of course means plantations and slavery.
I think the effects are still very much with us in the States, in the Caribbean, in Africa, in Europe. And it's something that in Scotland, it kind of had a collective amnesia about for a very long time, that we didn't really want to deal with it, and it was kind of passed over as something that wasn't us.
I've come to the Riverside Museum in Glasgow to talk to John Messner, who's both an American and a curator of transport and technology.
We have a display called Blockade Runners, Glasgow's role in the American Civil War. And it looks at that connection between what was going on in Glasgow in the 1860s, specifically through the ships that were being built here on the Clyde to run the blockade of the southern states. The blockade was set up to kind of squeeze the Confederacy, the Southerners, the rebels, and to force them into surrender. So they needed to get everything they needed for the war through this blockade, from weapons to medicine to food. And Clyde-built paddle steamers, not unlike the Waverley we still have today, were ideal to run that blockade.
So they built the ships here, and then they would fill them with the goods, and so where were they going?
Well, they might leave here from the Broomielaw or Greenock and head over to the kind of the British colonial holdings in the Caribbean. And then from there, they'd run back and forth to the ports in the south. They'd wait for their time. They'd wait for a new moon. They'd wait for the tides to be right, some of that, and then they'd make that dash. They didn't necessarily, they didn't carry any kind of weapons themselves, defensive weapons, because if you fired back, you could be seen as an enemy combatant. A lot of the blockade runners were faster than the blockaders. Their main thing was they were fast, and they were hard to see. Glasgow had been, the prime location for the development of this kind of technology, and by the 1860s, it was still innovating.
It's fascinating how much an impact what Glasgow was doing actually had on the war in America, extending it and making it possible to a large extent. It should have stopped after a couple of years.
Yeah, I think the ships and all the materials being sent over, it's something that maybe a lot of people don't know about. Because there are conflicts around the world where Britain and the West are directly or indirectly involved, whether it be Ukraine, conflicts in Africa. It's one of those that continues to remind ourselves today.